Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Business Processes Tech Talk. Today's topic is Introduction to the Microsoft Business Process Catalog in Azure DevOps. My name is Mandi Toves, and I will be your moderator today. I have with me Rachel Profitt, Principal Program Manager, who will be presenting today's session. Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mandi, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm excited to be here today to talk a little bit more in detail about our Azure DevOps template. For those of you that don't know me, I'd like to do detailed introductions, inclusive and accessible introductions. Again, my name is Rachel Profitt. I'm a Principal Program Manager here at Microsoft, responsible for the Business Process Excellence program. On the screen, you can see a QR code that will take you to my LinkedIn profile. If we're not already connected, I invite you to do so. And you can also see an image of myself. I'm a white woman with long red hair that's down wearing a pink shirt. My contact information is here on the slide. I do invite you to connect with me on any of the platforms that you might be a part of. In today's session, we are going to be diving into the details of how to set up and import the Microsoft Business Process Catalog, and we'll do kind of a getting started demo. In future Tech Talks, we'll be diving into more details of different work item types and how to use them in both Mavim and in Azure DevOps. We'll wrap up today by talking a little bit about our recommendations for when you should use Azure DevOps and when you should use Mavim for your business process management. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. We've got a lot to cover today. I want to get started by talking a little bit about how to set up your Azure DevOps project to get prepared for importing the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. If you're not aware, with our March release, we published some new Azure DevOps templates that make it easier to set up and use the Azure DevOps project and the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. It is a series of 4 separate Python scripts that are available today. And before you run those Python scripts, there are some prerequisites that you'll have to do. In between each of the Python scripts, there are some manual steps that need to be done, and I'll be walking through some of those and actually doing some short demos of that to walk you through what is required to set up that Azure DevOps project. Once you're done at the very end and you've run that 4th Python script, you're ready to start importing the business process catalog. So I'll talk through a little bit about that. And we'll do some high-level demos of how to start using the catalog in your Azure DevOps. If you don't already have the Python scripts and the template, which is an Excel file, and I'll be talking more about that, you can find those at aka.ms/bpc-ado template. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking in a little bit more detail about the prerequisites for this project. And as a reminder, everyone, we do invite you to ask questions throughout. So if you do have a question as I'm presenting or demoing, we encourage you to put those in the Q&A panel, and we'll try to get those answers or those questions answered throughout. We'll also have some time at the very end to dedicate to questions. So before you can actually start importing and running these Python scripts, there are a couple of things that will need to be in place. The first one is that you'll need to be a project collection administrator for the project or the tenant where you're going to install and configure this Azure DevOps environment. And that is because we're creating a new process that inherits from the Agile process. And we're also creating new projects. If you only have the project administrator, you won't be able to create the new process. You'll also need to create a personal access token. I'm not going to walk through in great detail the steps for creating a personal access token. But the Learn article that we've linked on the bottom of this page does have additional details and links out to the Azure DevOps documentation where you can learn all about how to create personal access tokens. And each of the scripts has an accompanying Learn article that tells you what the prerequisites are for each of those scripts. You'll, of course, need to download those Python scripts and the Excel template, and you'll need to edit and make some updates in that Excel template before you run it for the first time. I'll be walking through those steps in a little bit more detail. So why don't we switch gears and I'll talk a little bit more about that Excel template, and then I'm going to do a quick little demo for you. So the Excel template is a spreadsheet that has multiple tabs in it, and there are 5 things that we recommend, 3 that are kind of mandatory, and the last 2 are more like optional if you as a partner want to extend or modify the template that we are providing. The first thing that's really important is to update pick lists. One of the tabs in our spreadsheet is called pick lists. And at the very beginning of that tab in the spreadsheet, we've actually highlighted in yellow the pick lists that you should create and set the values for. These pick lists are designed to help, like they're pre-created, right? Like we've included them. We don't include any values because we expect the values in those drop-down boxes to be different for every project, and that's why you'll need to update them. Area paths, and this should say iteration paths as well. Area paths and iteration paths need to be created. We do give you some sample iteration paths that are literally called like iteration path 1, 2, and 3, but we would suggest that you obviously update those iteration paths to match your actual project plan and your phases and your sprints of however you're going to structure your project. The area paths are pre-created for you, and we actually don't recommend making changes to the lowest level of the hierarchy. And remember that if you do make changes to the area paths, you will have to update all of the business process catalog files, the deliverables, and so on to match those changes that you've made before you can import it. The next thing are teams. We have also pre-created a list of teams for you, but every project and every organization has a slightly different structure. And so what we've pre-created is a good starting point. We actually recommend that the teams is where you make your changes, and then you map the area paths that already exist to the teams that you want to create. The teams that we've created are actually quite detailed and are pretty complex, and oftentimes are more complex than what you need for a small, simple project. And so if you are doing a smaller project, we would recommend that you delete the teams that you don't need, and then map the area paths to the kind of condensed or smaller list of teams that you want to survive. It is also possible to add or update work item types. One of the tabs in the spreadsheet is the list of work item types. You can rename those work item types or create new ones. Keep in mind that if you rename an existing work item type, you'll always, every time we release the catalog, you'll always need to remember to update the name of that work item type in the file. So for that reason, we recommend that you generally don't rename those work item types unless it's absolutely necessary. But if you need to add new work item types, you can simply insert another row. You can also update the existing ones to change which fields show up on a particular work item, and that controls what happens in the script. You can also add or update fields. Again, we don't recommend that you change the names of the fields. All of the fields in the template have, there's 3 columns on the Fields tab, one for the reference name, one for the name, and one for the label. If you want to update the label, we would encourage you to do that. That's the best and easiest way if you want to change the name of a field. But if you change the name field or the reference name field, when you take new updates of the catalog, you'll need to remember to always update your template and column headers to match. So with that, I want to switch over and do a quick demonstration for you of that Excel template. I've already got the Excel template open. Actually, I may have be making a liar of myself. I thought I had it open. That's okay. I've got it handy, so I will open it right now. Okay. It's taking a second to load here. So what you should see on my screen now is the Excel template. You'll notice that there are a number of different tabs, and we've talked about a few of them already, but I wanted to kind of talk through and explain what the different tabs are, what you can and cannot or should not modify. The work item types is the list of all of the different work item types. You will notice that we have 3 standard work item types for Epic, Feature, and User Story that we recommend that you disable. This is actually one of the manual steps that you'll need to do later on. You can also see that some of these work item types are inherited from other work item types. The reference name column is not a column that you should modify. This is the system name that will be assigned to that particular work item type. There are columns with colors and icons. If you want to update and change the color or icons on your work items before you import them, that is absolutely perfectly safe. It won't, impact anything. We've also provided help text, a purpose, and we have several columns here that control how the backlog will be configured and function. If we collapse this down and we scroll across the right, you'll notice that there are a lot of columns with many, many X's in the spreadsheet. And these X's represent, each column represents one of the columns or one of the fields. And so this is how we instruct the Python scripts which fields to include on which work item types. We've spent a lot of time looking at all of the different fields that might be needed to track information in your project for different types of work items. And if I take integration as an example, we've included all of the columns that we suggest and recommend for your solution blueprint. It also includes all the same columns that we require when you do a solution blueprint review with the FastTrack team. That's true of most of these different types of Azure DevOps work items. The second tab is the Fields tab, and like I said before, we do have those field names, labels, and references. If you want to update the name of a field so that it looks different in your user interface, that label column is the column that we recommend you change. It's safe to change this. It won't affect your ability to take updates, but you should not change the field name or the reference name. You can also update the group names or the page names. We have provided page names and so on for you, but if you would like to change those or move fields around, change the sequence, that is perfectly acceptable and it won't hurt anything. We do not recommend that you change the field type. However, you are allowed, and you may choose to change the if whether or not a field is required, the default values, and so on. If you do add a new custom field to the list that's needed for your project methodology or your specific customer, there is a column in this spreadsheet called custom field, and you'll need to make sure that you set that to yes. But you can add as many fields as you want into this spreadsheet, and the Python scripts will automatically pick them up when you run it. There are a lot of definitions in here for some conditional rules. I will note that while we've documented a number of these rules, we have not actually automated any of these rule creations in the Python script creation. The pick list tab is where you'll find all of those pick lists. In general, we don't recommend that you make changes to the existing pick lists, but keep in mind that if you do, you would need to update and modify the data in the business process catalog as well to match that. There are 4 columns that are yellow at the very beginning of the spreadsheet, and those yellow ones are the ones that we recommend that you define for each of your projects. So we've created partner workshop types, partner phases, work streams, and authorized for deployment and current highest deployment. The examples of these authorized for deployment and highest deployment, we actually recommend that you use these to match your environments. The examples are dev, test, and prod. Obviously, if you name your environment something different, we would actually recommend that you create the values in that list to match the actual names of your environments. The iterations path, like I said, we do provide some iterations for you as a template and a starting point. The Python script does use this. So if you don't update it, it will create generic iterations for you called phase 1 initiate and phase 2 implement with sprints 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, these are very generic, and we would expect you to create these in a way that makes sense for your project. The area paths tab has the full list of area paths. The column that we recommend that you update or change is the teams tab. We actually don't recommend that you make changes to the area paths themselves. If you do need to add more area paths, you can do that. Just keep in mind that the rows, the data in the business process catalog won't map to those, and you would need to update the data in your business process catalog to match those area paths. But we do suggest that you update the teams to match the team structure of your organization. When you click over to the Teams tab, that's where you can see the full list of the teams, as well as the backlog behaviors for each of those teams. If you don't need as many teams, we suggest you slim this list down, and then on the Area Paths tab, map each of the area paths to the smaller list of teams that you're planning to use. The last tab is the Backlogs tab, and this is where we have the functionality that configures the backlog. There is a color list here. You can certainly make changes here. It changes the functionality and would make the demo and kind of how the project functions a little bit different, but this is the recommended backlog configuration. So with that, we're going to switch back to the slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the scripts in more detail. And talk you through what you need to do after you run the first script. So the Python scripts, I like to run them inside of Visual Studio, and I use GitHub Copilot. If you use GitHub Copilot to run those Python scripts, you don't really need to know a whole lot about Python. You can literally just ask it to run the script for you. You can also ask it in natural language to update the parameters for you and put your personal access token in, but it is also pretty easy to copy and paste those values into the script. So the things that after you've run the first script, what it does is it creates a new process, a new project, and adds all of the custom work item types and all of the custom pick lists and all of the custom fields. After you've done this, there are 3 kind of main steps that you'll need to do, and the detailed step-by-steps are documented inside of the Learn article that we've linked at the bottom of this page, but you'll want to disable the epic feature and user story. You'll also want to create your work item states and give users access to your project. If you already have a pre-existing project, the script is idempotent, meaning you can run it multiple times on the same project. And so like in future releases, if we add 2 more columns, you can technically just run the same script again. It will see that the existing fields already exist, and it would update them, like if there's any changes to them, and it would see that there's 2 new fields and just add those 2 new fields. So I'm going to kind of move on to the next script. So the second script, what it does is the script that actually adds all of the individual fields to the work items. If you forgot to do the manual steps, like between these scripts, it technically doesn't matter. You could go straight to doing this and then do the manual steps afterwards. But it is important that the postscript tasks that you do in script 2 do need to be done before you can run script 3, or you may receive some errors. So there's a number of things that need to be done, and I'm actually going to do some demonstrations on a few of these tasks for you, just so you can see how it works in my Azure DevOps environment. So the adding of HTML fields, the Python scripts and the Azure DevOps API does not support the addition of HTML type fields onto a page layout through the API. So you have to manually add those controls. And so I'll do a short demonstration of that. We also have a handful of fields that are like a drop-down box of pick list that is actually a multi-select. And in order to make that work, you have to actually install a add-in called the multi-value control in your Azure DevOps project. And then once you've installed that add-on, you can go manually configure those controls so that way it will allow you to have the drop-down boxes. And I'll be doing a short demonstration of that as well here for you in a few minutes. You'll also need to configure the system work item types. And the main example of that is the test case work item type. There's also an out-of-the-box work item type for bug that has a few extra columns on it, but a test case is probably the most important one. We don't provide any bugs out of the box. So if you don't add any custom fields to the bug, it technically won't hurt you, but we do suggest that you add some fields to several of those other work item types. The detailed instructions and the fields that are recommended to be added are documented in the Learn article. But the Azure DevOps API does not allow you to modify the out-of-the-box work item types to add more fields and controls to it through the API. So you have to do it through the user interface. There are also a couple of optional things that we've documented for you that we recommend that can just improve the usability of your Azure DevOps project, but it's not mandatory. Adding fields to multiple tabs. You can also modify the labels. There's a few fields that are actually the story points field. We actually recommend that you rename or relabel that field. However, you can't do that in the spreadsheet before you import, because that out-of-the-box field, again, cannot be modified through the API. You have to do it through the user interface. So a few things there where you could add a couple of columns to multiple tabs just to make it more accessible and easy to use, and then a few of the labels that we recommend you update to just make it easier for your users to use. So with that, I am going to switch over to my Azure DevOps project and do a demonstration for you. So I have pre-run all of the different Python scripts in 4 separate projects. So in my TechTalk phase 1 project here, I have only run the first script. So I just wanted to kind of quickly show you, like, after you run the first script, I'm gonna switch back to the organization settings here actually, and navigate into the processes. So in this TechTalk phase 1 process that I created from the Python script, you'll see that I have all of the work item types. It did create a project for me, so that's the TechTalk phase 1 project. You'll notice that when I come over to the backlog levels, the backlog levels have not been configured. Pretty much everything is sitting in the other work item types backlog, and that is because the 4th script is what does that configuration. One of the tasks that we tell you that you should do is that you should disable the epic feature and user story. That's simply done by navigating into the process, clicking the ... or the ellipsis button, and then selecting disable on those work item types. So I'm just going to quickly do that, and I'll scroll down and find that user story as well. They are stored here alphabetically. The other thing that I will point out that the script does is you come back to all of your processes. the Fields tab gets populated with all of the custom fields. All of the fields that come from the Microsoft Business Process Catalog are suffixed with MSBPC. That makes it easy for you to see them and find them in the list. But that was actually an important change. If you used one of the early releases of our private preview, we did not do that. But this actually prevents the field from being a duplicate of an existing field in a project. If you don't like those MSBPCs, you can take them off. We've set all of the labels of the fields to not use them. But if I go back into the process, and I'll just open up one of the work item types, you'll notice that like this end-to-end work item type here, it does have a few fields in it. These are the default fields that are included on all work item types. So if I were to open up 3 or 4 different work item types, you would see these, but you don't see, I've actually run some of the scripts on this, so like you can see that it does have some of the fields. But in general, like you would only see the fields that are out of the box on these work items before you run that second script. So adding HTML fields, I'm going to come over to that references tab, because that references tab, you'll notice that there are no HTML fields, rich text fields, and there's actually 5 of them that are included on every single work item type that you'll have to add manually. So the way you do this is by coming into the work item type, you're going to click on Add Field, and then you're going to choose the option to use an existing field. And then I'm going to go ahead and search for the Microsoft references. I'm going to use the drop-down box here, Microsoft references. So all of the references are going to come down the left-hand side. So Microsoft references. On the options tab, you could select if you want to make a field required or default. We don't, by default, make any of these fields be required. You can also choose that layout. And when you're ready, you click Add Field, and now you can see that Microsoft references. We do actually recommend that when you add these, when you go to the layout tab, that you actually delete the MSBPC so that the label of the field is just nice Microsoft references. And then you'll repeat this process clicking New Field, and you'll need to add the Mavim references. Obviously, if you're not using Mavim, you don't need to add this field. So this could be one of those fields that you omit. You could delete it completely from the Excel spreadsheet. Oops, I think I clicked cancel instead of add field. Oh, and I don't want Mavim ID. I want Mavim references. There we go. Add field. So there you can see that's added. The third one are the internal references. So I'll use an existing field and search for internal references. Update the label to not include the MSBPC and click Add Field. The fourth one is the partner references. Update that to not include the MSBPC. And the last one is the update comments field. This update comments field is used by Microsoft when we publish new releases. This is where we tell you what we've modified or changed in our release. As a partner, if you are extending and modifying the catalog yourself, and releasing that, you can leverage this update comments field yourself as well to document and publish what those changes are. So that's the process for adding HTML fields. You'll need to repeat that process and making sure that you add all of the correct fields to all of the correct work item types. These 5 are included on all work item types, so you'll have to repeat this. There are some other fields that are HTML type fields that you'll find on other work item types, and the details of exactly which fields to add to which work item type are documented in the Learn article. The next thing I want to demonstrate for you is how to configure the multi-select control fields. So we have a couple of fields that out of the box we suggest are multi-select fields. Industries is one of those. So I've already installed the add-in. You obviously will need to install that add-in in your environment. You can do that by navigating to the marketplace, using that marketplace icon and searching for that multi-value control, and you click on the Get for Free. It is published by the Microsoft Dev Labs. It's a very common extension that's used in many projects. If you've already got it installed in your tenant, you won't need to install it. So what I'm going to do is click on the field group where I want to add a custom control using that ... and select the option to add custom control. You'll see that by default, my multi-value control is already selected. You can click the drop-down box if you had multiple different extensions installed. You might need to pick it from the drop-down box. I only have one, so I don't need to do anything. Options. On the Options tab, this is where you'll need to select the field that you're going to use. So I'm going to choose the Industries MSBPC field, and then I'm going to click on the Layout tab and type in the label. This is actually important. If you don't do this, you don't get a label, and then I'll click OK. And now at this point, you'll see that I have two fields called Industries. I have the control extension and the original field. I'm going to click on Edit on the original field, and you're going to go to the Options tab. And one of the things that's really important here is that you need to allow users to enter their own values on the original field. You don't want to do it on the control extension. You only want to do it on the original field. So I'll click Save. And then the other thing that I recommend you do is you hide the original field from the layout. You'll repeat this process for application family, products, and software solutions. And then once you've completed that process, you'll repeat it for each of the work item types that include these fields. It's not every single work item type, but it is most of them. So you'll need to repeat those steps for each of the different each of the different work item types in each of the different multi-select controls. All right, so after you have run the third script, and it's important that you do these steps before you move on to the third script, you're ready to configure, add users to your teams, configure your team settings, and configure other Azure DevOps features. So one of the things that we recommend, one of the teams that we include is a generic team called the Sprint team. That Sprint team has like every single area path inside of it. And if you want to kind of allow everybody to see all work items and you don't want tight control over that security, the easiest way to do that is to add everybody into the Sprint team. And the Sprint team is inside of all of the other teams. And by doing that, you'll basically be giving everybody access to everything. If you don't want that and you want to have tighter control of the security, you can add specific people to each team and then have that security control to limit who can see what work items in which teams. The detailed instructions for how to do that are included in the Microsoft Learn article. We include a link that takes you out to that. There are a couple of team settings that you'll need to think about and configure on your own. After we've kind of created the teams, we give you the teams in a generic structure, but obviously this is always going to be a little bit different for each project. You'll need to assign sprints to your teams. You might want to create dashboards for your teams, and you might want to update or edit the permissions for your teams. Some other things that you'll want to think about after you've run script 3 is whether or not you want to create queries, just general dashboards. There's lots of other features inside of Azure DevOps that can be leveraged and used and configured. We aren't necessarily providing all of those things out of the box. We're just giving you a template and a starting point that hopefully helps accelerate your projects. The Learn article does include a lot of details for you. The fourth script is the configuring of the backlog. That fourth script, the way you run it is pretty much the same as the other scripts. The Learn article that we have published actually includes the step-by-step instructions for configuring it, because this preview script has not been tested by as many customers and partners. Once we get more feedback on it that it's working and people aren't having errors or issues with it, we'll update the documentation to have detailed steps about how to run the script. You certainly can run that script, but what I want to do is switch over and do another quick demonstration for you of that process of configuring the backlog. So I'm going to switch back to my browser here. One more thing that I wanted to, like, I mentioned it earlier, but I do want to quickly show it. The states. I mentioned that work item states have to be created. All of the work items by default, like Azure DevOps creates a new active and closed state. We recommend that partners and customers like define what the process is that you're going to use in your project for managing each of the different types of work items and create states and statuses, if you will, that makes sense for it. You can also create rules. We have documented, like I said, in the Excel spreadsheet, I kind of showed some of those columns. We have documented some rules, but those rules are not configured for you automatically. So if you want to create those, you have to do it here. One thing that I do want to call out is if we go down to the test case work item, there is one state that you have to add in order to be able to import the work items. And that is you need to create a new state called new for the proposed state category. You can choose a color for it if you want and click create. So I always recommend that like you create it and you move it up and it would be the first state. The reason you need to do this is that all work items in the Microsoft Business Process Catalog default to a state of new when it's created across the board. And since the test case work item type does not include a new state by default, it's one of the pre-existing work item types. It doesn't include the new state. You will have to add that manually in order to be able to import those. So I'm going to go back to the processes. What I want to do next is kind of talk a little bit about the backlog levels. So I want to go back. I'm going to use TechTalk Phase 3 and kind of show you some of this backlog configuration. So this particular project has had scripts 1, 2, and 3 have been run, but we have not run script 4 in it yet, which does the backlog configuration automatically. So when you open up the process from the organization settings, there is a tab here called backlog levels. You do have to have those work item, like you have to have run scripts 1, 2, and 3 for this to work. And this is where you'll need to do some of that work. And so we actually recommend that you rename the epics and features backlog. And I actually forgot what they're called off the top of my head. So I'm going to quickly go into my TechTalk Phase 4 and show you. So the epic one is called levels. So the way you do that is you click the ... next to it and you say edit or rename, and you'll just type over it, right? So levels and lowest. There's 2 additional ones that you add, and the step-by-step instructions walk you through this. So you can click on that new top-level portfolio. And then you go through a process on each one of these. If I go into the edit rename and you mark the check boxes for each of the work item types that you want to include in that particular backlog. And so the step-by-step instructions walk you through that. If I go back to my TechTalk Phase 3 where I haven't run the script yet, you'll notice that it doesn't include, like, all of the other work item types are like down below. And so what you'll do is you'll come in here and edit rename, and we call this one levels. And then you would go mark the different types that you're going to include in it, right? So it's processes and process areas, I do believe. And so once you've added those, they show up, and then you kind of repeat that process for each one. And so then if you say edit, rename, this one is the lowest. And then you go mark the check boxes next to each of the ones that you want to include in that particular backlog. And I think in this case, it should be system process, test case, maybe, and there's one other one. System, oh, scenario. And so you mark those checkboxes and it moves them. As you mark them, they disappear from this list. And so once you're finished with it, your no associated backlog list becomes a lot smaller. If I switch back to the phase 4 where it's already configured, and go into the backlog levels, you can see kind of the end state. There's Kanban, the highest, which includes functional areas and trees. The levels includes end-to-ends, processes, and process areas. The lowest includes folders, phases, scenarios, and system processes. The requirements backlog is where you put all of those deliverable type work items. And you have to mark one of them as the default when you create each of these. And so we do make a recommendation. You can obviously change what you want the default to be. So like you might choose that you want the requirement work item type to be the default. And that means like when you're creating a new work item, it would default to a requirement when you're in the requirements backlog. Otherwise, the user has to click in the drop-down box to choose which type you want it to be. Your iteration backlog includes action items, business tasks, and tasks. And then the other work item types is where you can see the other stuff that's kind of left over that is not included in the backlogs. So that's the organizational settings that you need to do for your backlogs. You'll also need to go into the project and do some configuration directly on the project. So I'm going to go into TechTalk Phase 3 and kind of walk you through some of that project configuration. In this project, I haven't run the Python script that does some of this for you automatically. So if you're doing it manually, the process here is that you're going to go a couple things. You're going to want to start in your project configuration, validate that you've got the right iterations that you want and the right areas. If you ran script 3, it would have imported these, and it looks like maybe I did not run script 3 in this environment. That's okay. I'm going to switch to a different project. Find one that I did run it. Maybe I did it in phase 4. Okay, so go back into project settings, project configuration. Yeah, so there you can actually see I've got the phases and the areas are all created. And you'll notice everything has the sprints. Every single one has the sprints. And that's why that sprints generic team is if you add all of your users to the sprints team, then they'll be able to see everything. If you don't want to do that, you can kind of control it more specifically. So once you've got iterations and areas, the next step is to go to the team configuration. There are some settings here that you'll want to set up and manage. And so you'll choose like which backlog levels you want to include. By default, the working days are set to Monday through Friday. You can obviously change that. And we also recommend that bugs are managed with requirements. So that's like one of the default settings we recommend. Next, you come to the iterations tab, and this is where you will need to do some updates. If you run the script, it will actually do this for you automatically. And right now, you can see that I'm in the team called TechTalk Phase 2, but I actually want to switch to the accounting team. And so inside of the accounting team, we would want to select the areas that so you choose which iterations make sense and which areas. And in this case, you can see that we've got the finance, accounting, and accounting. The default is currently set to the parent finance team, but if you wanted to change that to be the lowest level, you can click the dot, dot, dot and say set as the default. You can also optionally create templates. We don't provide any templates out of the box, but that is an optional configuration you can do. So once you've done that backlog configuration, you can actually go to the backlog. And if you go to the backlog I wanted to go to the boards for a particular team. No, I do want backlog. All teams, there we go. So like, now you'd be able to see that accounting backlog. It's important to note that the settings, there's a set of instructions in the Learn article that have to be done per person. So these settings over here where you choose if you want the lowest, the deliverables, or the levels, and I didn't actually go mark the levels, so I should go back and do it. But like you choose the levels, and then there's also a checkbox here where we recommend that you turn the parents on. In this particular environment, I don't have any work items created yet, so that's why it's empty, because we haven't imported the actual work items yet. But that's one of the settings that we recommend is that you turn this on, but that is a per user setting and each user would have to do that. There's also a settings icon over here that you can get. So if you forgot to turn on levels, or you forgot to change this, you can get to those settings directly from here. And now you can actually change to that levels view. The levels view is the view that I prefer and that I typically demo from. Obviously, it's a user preference thing. And I think it's easier to navigate when you have the parents because then you'll be able to see the difference between your business processes, your deliverables, your objectives, and the 4 different trees. So, lots of other options and things. I'm not going to go through all of those, but those are kind of the basics of configuring the backlog. At this point, right, you've now got an empty Azure DevOps project and you're ready to start importing the Microsoft Business Process Catalog into your DevOps environment. There are a couple different ways that you can do this. You can do this manually. And the way that we've documented in our Learn articles is the manual technique, where you need to split the CSV files into 1,000 rows or less. You can use the Open in Excel feature as well. If you've installed that add-in, I do believe that add-in is actually being deprecated. So like you could still use it now, but I think it's on its way out. And it's important to note that test cases cannot be imported using the normal import process. Test cases have to be imported using the test cases import. If you want to automate the process, there are a couple of ways to do this. We are planning to write Python scripts that will be included. We have not released one yet, but you can write your own Python scripts if you would like to import the files. And that's honestly going to be the preferred method for importing the rows in mass. You can also create your own Power Automate flows. The Power Automate flows have the ability to call all the same APIs that you can call using Python scripts. And then there's also an out-of-the-box integration. If you're using Mavim, we actually recommend that you use their Power App integration. So they have a Power App embedded into Mavim that uses a number of different Power Automate flows to keep your Azure DevOps and your Mavim environment in sync. And so if you're using both Mavim and Azure DevOps, that would be the recommended approach. The article that we've linked down here, like I said, walks you through this first process, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about in more detail. Once we do get Python scripts in the future, we will do another tech talk and kind of walk through that process of using the Python scripts to import the rows. So it'll be important. You need to download that Microsoft Business Process Catalog. You can find it at aka.ms/business process catalog. The link is also available in the Learn article that you see on the page here. You'll want to filter down the file. So when you are working with the file, and I'm going to quickly switch over to the spreadsheet. So I've got the March release of the catalog downloaded here. A couple things of note that you'll want to think about, like, so I've got the filters turned on in my file by default. Like when you download it, you should have those filters as well. If you scroll over to the right, there are some columns over here called application family and products. So for example, if you are not using Business Central, you may want to go find all the rows for Business Central and delete them, right? So you can filter for the product equal to Business Central and highlight all of those rows and delete them. If a row has multiple values in it, like Business Central and Finance, that means the row applies to both Business Central and Finance. And if you're doing Finance, you wouldn't want to delete that particular row. But if you're not doing field service, the rows or Business Central, right? If there's rows that only apply to Business Central or field service, you wouldn't want to delete those. So that's what we mean by filtering. You can filter out application families or products. You can also filter out things that are deprecated. So like in a brand new installation for a brand new customer, we would recommend that you find all of the deprecated rows and delete them. No point in importing something that can't or shouldn't be used and that we're going to delete in a future release. So filtering out those deprecated ones. And then, right, if you do your scoping exercise and process in here, you may also want to delete rows that are not in scope, etc. So by default, the scope on all rows is set to unspecified, and we would recommend that you go through a scoping process. You can do that obviously in Excel before you import it if you're trying to minimize and shorten the list. Also, right, if you're only doing like customer service, you may not want all these end-to-ends, right? So if you kind of do a high-level scoping at the end-to-end level, then you can get rid of all the end-to-end processes that don't make sense for your particular project. So that's what we mean by filtering. One of the other things that you'll need to do is update the area path and the iteration path. If I switch back to the Excel file very quickly, I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. In all of the files, we include the area path and the iteration path, and you'll notice that it says your project name here. You have to actually replace your project name with your project name. So if your project name, in my case, is Business Process Catalog Test that I'm going to import into, I would do a find and replace in my file in both the area path column and the iteration path column. If you want to do the extra work to put everything into the correct iteration, you can, like if you've made phases like phase 1, phase 2, you can put the slashes on there as well. Like, so if you're going to do finance in phase 1 and you're going to do warehousing in phase 2, you could go find all the rows and map them before you import it. But you can also do that after you've imported it. But it is a mandatory field in order to import rows into Azure DevOps. So you do have to have it here. And the root node of your iteration path is the name of your project. So you just replace that with the name of your project. You will need to split your file into 1,000 rows or less. When you're doing the business process rows, you'll need to delete the test cases and handle them separately. When you're doing deliverables, objectives, or the success by design delivery plan, it's just splitting it into 1,000 rows or less. And then you'll need to save it as a CSV file. And once you've saved it as a CSV file, you're ready to import it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a short little demo here for you of how to import one of these CSV files. For the demonstration, I'm going to use the objectives file. And so I'm going to switch over. I actually have the objectives file open. I have not done the replacement yet of the area path and iteration path. So I am going to do a find and replace with your project name here and replace it with the name of my project, which for my demonstration, I'm going to be using my business process catalog test project. And I'm going to click on replace all. And so it is now found and replaced. This particular tree is less than 1,000 rows. It only has about 200 rows in it, so it'll go pretty quick for demonstration purposes. I will do another quick demo for you of how to split the files because there are a few things that you'll want to keep in mind when you're splitting files. But for the actual import, I'm going to use this one. It is already saved as a CSV. If you haven't, like I provided in an XLSX file, if you haven't, make sure you click on Save As and choose to save it as a CSV file. And that CSV file is the version that you will want to import. So mine is already saved. I'm going to click Save again just to make sure, and I will close the file because I'm going to actually import this. So I'm going to switch over to my browser now. Not that window, this window. Yep. I'm like, too many windows. Here we go. I am going to switch into my business process catalog test project because that's what I replaced the names with. I'm going to open up the queries page. And then I'm going to click on import work items in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to choose my file. This will open up my browser to browse to the file that I want. And so I'm going to choose that objectives file that I just updated and click open. And then I will click import. And now you can see it has like pre-populated all of these fields or work items over here. You'll notice the IDs are blank, but it does have the Microsoft IDs. Everything that's bold is like new. If you see any red lines, the red lines mean that there is an error message. You can scroll through, you can click on any of the items and look at it. You can actually modify them right from here before you import it if you so choose. I'm not going to make any changes. I'm just simply going to click on Save Items. If you're doing a full file with like 1,000 items, it will take a little bit longer. This will take about a minute or so. I'm going to let that run. And while that's running, I am going to switch to my deliverables file and talk you through a little bit of how this works. So I actually have two deliverables files. The first one I've already modified. And I'm going to open that one up. So part one, I already modified to be a CSV file, and I have deleted all like so it's the first row, and in my file I go down to row 851. You are allowed to do up to 1,000 rows. You can go to 999, or exactly 1,000 if you want. I prefer when I split the files to split on even like tree levels, right? So if I go back over to my deliverables part two, which I have not modified yet, it's ready to be modified. One of the things that you'll need to remember is that you're going to do this in chunks or phases. And so part one included rows 1 down through 851. And I chose that row because that is where a new level 2 starts. So when I get down there, almost there. Oops. This is where the accounts receivable section starts. So I wanted to start clean on accounts receivable. Well, accounts receivable still needs to have the parent. So what I'm going to do is I'm holding Control and Shift and then arrow up, and I'm going to delete the whole chunk for accounting, but I'm going to keep the rows for deliverables and finance, which are the parents, if I get back up to the very top of this file. So now you can see I have deliverables, finance, and accounts receivable. It's important because I'm going to import the first chunk. After I've imported chunk 1, I actually need to populate this with the number of the actual um, you know, work item of the deliverables tree and of the folder that was imported. And this, if you don't do this, what it will do is it would create another parent row. If you delete these two rows, you can choose to do that, but then you would need to go find this row and manually assign it to the parent of finance. So, and then like the file is still too large. There's about 7,000, well, just over 7,000 deliverables. So I would need to navigate down, excuse me, to the closest I can get to 1,000, right? So I'm going to page down a whole bunch of times and see where the 1,000. So it's probably going to be Treasury because Treasury was at row 969. So that would be the row that I would choose and I would delete everything else. And so I'm getting a couple of the L3s in here. And my next file, part 3, would start at Treasury. Remember that you will need to update the area path and your iteration path, and then you'll need to click on File, Save As, and save it as a CSV before you can import that file. Okay, my demos have gone a lot longer than I expected them to, and I'm that's okay. I think given where we're at on time, I'm going to switch back to my slides. Talk through a few things that we'll do quickly. We will be doing deep dives on all of this, so don't worry, like we will have more sessions to talk through this in more detail. But common actions that you're going to take once you've imported the catalog is scoping, creating queries that like filter, making your backlogs, and navigating the backlog. We will be doing a deep dive on all of these items, creating new work items. We'll be doing deep dives on every single type of work item in our Tech Talk series. So we do definitely want you to join us for that in the future. But the last topic that I wanted to quickly talk about before we wrap up for today, and we are going to go a few minutes over, so I apologize about that, is when to use Azure DevOps and when to use Mavim. This is one of the most common questions that I get, and so I wanted to talk through quickly kind of what this looks like. So Azure DevOps is designed for project management and for your IT and project teams to use. And Mavim is a business process management solution that's intended for your business users, business owners, your SMEs, etc., to use to document business processes, to put your standard operating procedures in, and have that help, if you will, for the application. And so that's kind of like the high level explanation that I like to tell people, but I also have another slide that details out a little bit more of kind of like what that relationship typically looks like if you're using both. Now, you can technically do scoping directly in Excel or in Azure DevOps, but when you use Mavim, we would recommend that you use it for scoping, your process redesign, that's not really a feature of Azure DevOps, your fit gap analysis, feedback, and adoption. While you use Azure DevOps to help you manage the project, the work that needs to be done, the iterations, scheduling, and assigning that work, as well as the testing process and documenting the details of testing for your particular project. And so I think this slide gives you a nice little visualization of where Mavim plays well and where Azure DevOps plays well. We do think that it is a better together, but many of these things can be done in Azure DevOps, but certain things like process redesign, for example, Azure DevOps does not have any features or functionality to help with that. With that, we are going to wrap it up. I have pulled together a few slides for you all that have all of the hyperlinks that you'll need. So this first slide has all of the links related to Azure DevOps and the Business Process Catalog. And then we also have all of your general Microsoft Business Process Catalog resources. And we hope that you will join us on our next Tech Talk. So Somebody asked, do you have scenarios for all ISV providers, or is it just some? Like this example, import purchase orders from Azure SFT SharePoint location automatically using Avantico's AMCS? It's a great question. As of right now, we only have a few. We are very actively working and inviting ISVs and partners that have solutions in the marketplace to add their solutions. It has been a slow process. But we're hoping that over time, the list of those ISV solutions will become more complete. And again, when I talked about filtering earlier, you would be able to use the software development company and software development solutions to more easily filter and find those scenarios that are specific to a particular marketplace solution. So great question. We don't have all of them. It's a goal that we're gonna like build them up. So somebody asked a question, why do you have bad descriptions like this? So thank you for the feedback. I won't read the whole thing. You can actually report errors like this. It does sound like somebody probably accidentally put something in the wrong column. And so that should be in our internal references comments column. So apologies about that. If you do find errors or problems with any of the catalog data, we encourage you to report those in our GitHub repository on the Issues tab. There is an AKA link for that I think we had on the previous slide. I think it's called Business Process Catalog Requests. Will take you right to that page where you can report issues, request changes, and so on. So that's the hyperlink where you can report those. Thank you for reporting this one. We'll make sure that that one gets cleaned up and check to see if there's any others like that. Well, thank you so much, Mandi. We do appreciate everybody joining us. Your feedback is important to us. Apologies that we went a little bit over today, but we had a lot of information to get through, a lot of demos. And, we invite you to take our survey about today's Tech Talk. Your feedback is very important to us, and we hope that you'll take a few minutes to fill that out. And if you do have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Mandi or anyone on the team. We're always happy to help you get going on your journey to implement the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. Bye, everyone.